We're going to talk about interviews. So, especially we will be focused on the tech interview part, but in general, we will review what is happening, prior than we are going to the stage. So, first of all, we could have some kind of request which is coming to our board, and we are looking into it. And that request usually contains information of what our person should have, what our person good to have, what is level required for the specific position, and what is the timeline. So, for example, we should hire a new, for example, senior Salesforce developer with a specific knowledge in the Sales Cloud or Service Cloud, wherever. For example, with timeline equal to 1 month. So that means that in 1 month we should have the person who will be able already start and work on that project. Once we have that request is usually coming to our human resources department, and our human resources department reviewing the list of existing employees. If in the list of existing employees we already have someone who is free and ready to pick up that project, of course we are allocating that person to the project or request and we are done. But if at that case we could see that there are no available specialists and we need to make a new hire, so in that case we are open position, to hire. So after that, what we have in it, we are in the next phase, which is called game candidate. And during the period, here is the following what is happening. So first of all, when the position started to be opened on different kind of platforms, so candidates starting to send their CVs, their requests to be able to actually, try their hands and pass the specific interviews related to the role. But what happening prior to this? There is first of all profile check or CV check. So what does it mean? So it means that if our candidate have some specific CV and he sends that CV to our recruiter, so then our recruiter or, for example, some manager reviewing that CV and trying to understand if the person actually fits our role or not, because we don't want to overload our technical team, right, to perform technical interviews. If, for example, based on the CV, we could see that the person is actually not a good fit for our position. So there might be a different kind of situation. So, for example, some person send you a CV, and in the CV you don't see the relevant experience. Maybe it's a Java developer, but you're looking for the Salesforce developer. Maybe it's a JavaScript developer, whatever, right? So if you could see any kind of inconsistency, which is actually not confirm you that that candidate is suitable, so in that case, that candidate could be filtered out on that candidate first step, right? When we are reviewing list of CVs from a different kind of candidates. So once we made initial filtering, so then we have something called a pre-screening call. So pre-screening call is actually a call where our recruiter calling the specific candidate, right, and have some short talk with that candidate about, past experience, about goals for the future, about his technical stack, can generally understand if the person is actually suitable for the company, and if that person, I don't know, speaking well in English, right? If, for example, English is one of the key requirements for our position, or for example, if that candidate is not too aggressive, or if that candidate, it's, for example, smart enough, or if, for example, information provided in his CV is up to date, and so on and so forth, right? So there are a lot of, ideas behind of the pre-screening call, but it's actually another level of filtering, right? But where we could understand the soft skills of our person and understand if we, actually allow him to come to the next round. So round of the technical interview. So of course, there might be sometimes more rounds. And for example, even after technical interview, we could have a client or manager interview, or any kind of, other stages, or even sometimes our technical interview could be, divided into a couple of parts. When one of them is related to architecture, another one related to, for example, coding, another one related to the general hard skill check, how, for example, Salesforce doing as a company. But at this moment, what we will do is we will review how our technical interview, usually constructed. So first of all, here our technical interview is actually have the following stages. So first of all, we are doing preparation to the technical interview. When we doing preparation, what our specialist who will conduct the specific interview will need to do, it's he will need to check the CV in order to make sure that he understands what is our candidate experience. For example, if we need to review the candidate for the architect position, we could take a look into his CV, understand if he has enough knowledge, so what was his professional domain, and so on and so forth. So next, what is required to do for our candidate is to check the position in order to understand what are actual requirements, what specific skill set is required, what specific product knowledge is required, and so on and so forth. So basic idea is to have in the head of the interviewer understanding what is his current candidate and what is the required position and required skills. So then what is will be required for our interviewer to check its competency matrix. So usually in different kind of departments, like for example, Salesforce departments, we have understanding who is eligible to which role. Like for example, if the person showing the following skills, right, or have that level of details in his head, he's for example junior. So if it's one level above, then it's middle, and so on and so forth. And we could understand what kind of questions we need to ask in order to be able to understand if the person is actually eligible to the specific level and specific role. So then what we need to do is we need to align on the time and duration. So sometimes specific position require for us to do long interview. Some positions, require for us, for example, have it only 1 hour and so on and so forth. So here we need to understand what is happening. And first of all, right, as a part of this, preparations for the technical interview, if we have in our department a couple of interviewers, so in that case, we will need to find out the person, who will be available for the interview and who will have the specific, level that could actually check, that request and candidate with it, um, candidate for that role. So next round or next phase that we have here is the actual process of the technical interview. So here might be the following. So usually when we do our technical interview, we need to make sure that our candidate is first of all on the specific level. Like for example, if you are looking, for example, for senior Salesforce developers with the knowledge of the CPQ, so in that case, according to the competency matrix of our company, we need to take a look if that specific specialist is actually meets our expectation for the senior developer, and then we could ask for the specifics. So that means that we could ask for the knowledge related to CPQ. If it's, for example, not included into our competency matrix. Sometimes we have a very specific request when, for example, we are looking for the developer who is know specifically, like something very specific in the Salesforce. Like, for example, at this moment, we have a request to hire a person who will be able to set up call centers for Salesforce, right? So in that case, of course, in our case, there might be more specifics than, like actual checks against of, competency matrix. But it again depends on, like what kind of request we've got. So then what we have, if we have a possibility to still have some time during our process of interview, it's to answer questions that our candidate might have. So sometimes some of these questions are actually related to the, how we did our interview, or sometimes those questions might be related to the project where the candidate will need to work, or for example, candidate would like to get more information about what are, for example, specific stack for that project or wherever, right? So we need to just include it. And then we have a final stage here, which is providing results. So that means that in general, a good practice is for us to provide results back to our managers in 8 hours. So that means that, or less than in 8 hours, in order to make sure that our experience that our candidates have the most proper. So we are not asking them to wait in like a couple of weeks once we will provide some kind of feedback and so on and so forth. So it should be pretty quick, right? So for example, if you did interview today, so tomorrow you already should have results. So second, our result, which our technical interviewer will provide, need to meet expectations for our company. Like for example, if our company expects that, like always when we are doing an interview process, we are providing, for example, some kind of, specific format. So in that case, according to that specific format, we need to have, provided answers and results of that specific interview. Plus, on top of this, it will be good for us to have recommendations and notes. And those recommendations and notes might be potentially shared with a specific person who did that interview in order to let him know what else he could, train, or what he should, do in order to fulfill that position, for example, in 1 month or in 3 months. So next, what we might have, so we could have candidates pool. So that means that, like when we have a lot of candidates, right, who would like to apply for our position, so here we might have some consolidated place, and in that consolidated place, we might have information about how our candidates looks for us according to what we could see in their CV and in experience, which is mentioned in their profiles. For example, in some LinkedIn profiles or in their CV or somewhere else, right? So, and we are usually putting our initial opinion related to that candidate into that specific, for example, data source. So, in different kind of companies, it might be different. So, for example, for our video, we just created it as a table in the same document, where based on our initial opinion, we are putting here information about how that candidate look like for us at this moment when we just reviewing his, like, for example, LinkedIn profile and his CV, and it will help us in the future to understand how many times we were right when we are reviewing a CV on the candidate, or how many times we were wrong when we tried to, like just based on the CV, understand, like if the person is actually suitable for our role or not. So then we have our opinion after interview. So that means that, for example, if previously that candidate was looking good in terms of CV, and now we could see that he is like a very strong developer with good experience, understanding of Salesforce architecture, and so on and so forth. So in that case, like our interview status might be that, for example, we would like to recommend the person, right? And then we have, like wherever our final decision process, or sometimes a candidate could reject the position, or sometimes the company could reject whatever, right? What might happen. But in that case, it will allow us to save the history, right, and understand what was our initial expectation and what was our final, like view on that candidate. So now let's jump to the next topic, which is related to interview parts. So first of all, for us, in order to be able for our recruiter to help set up interview for the candidate, which is at this moment already have his representation, his CV, it's his some hard skills, soft skills, some experience, motivation. So it's something which attributes of our candidate. At the same time, we have our experts. So our experts have their own, let's say, attributes, like for example, level of that candidate, right? So usually we need to make sure that the level of our expert is, like, um, let's say, the experience that our expert have in the field, it's much more than, expertise of our candidates, that the expert could actually do a proper interview. We need to understand if we have those candidates who at this moment, like free and available, in order to make that specific interview. And then we need to understand if our specific expert is actually trained as an interviewer or not. Why it's important? Sometimes, like we understand that those persons who is doing interview are actually face of the company, and we need to make sure that, let's say, their level of communication is good enough, right, to make a good impression on candidate, even if, for example, by the end of the interview, the role will be defined as that candidate is not suitable, right? There should be no any kind of, like problems in communication, and congenial interview should be done in the positive manner. So in terms of timeline, how it might look like. So first of all, during every kind of interview, we need to have kind of introduction, right? Because like we are hosting that specific call, so we are reviewing candidates. So first of all, that means that we should make a greeting, right? So we should introduce ourselves, who we are, so whom we are looking, right? And give that small introduction to the person with whom we will talk next 1 or 1.5 hours, and let him know, for example, what is our rules. Like, for example, here is we will have a technical interview. So the technical interview will have, for example, 5 different chapters related to different technologies that we will check for that specific role. So, for example, first one will be related to LVC, next one to the flows, and so on and so forth. So after that, we could let our candidate know that, for example, through our interview process, if I will be able to see that you, for example, have enough knowledge in some topic, I could just stop you in order for us to not waste the time, because we have, like a lot of items to cover, and we will be able to move forward. So after that, like we are letting our candidate speak, because, like we did our intro. So in that case, we could ask our candidate for him to introduce himself, and because it's a technical interview, right, not interview related to soft skills, So in that case, we could ask our candidate to actually provide information about his past experience, especially experience for the last year. So why it's important? First of all, it will give him a time to like adapt and to give you information about something which is already familiar for that person, right? Because he's already know information about himself. So when he will talk, so it will give him a time to adapt, to be able to give also you some kind of overview about that candidate, and it will like be a good start for the interview. Because if you will be able to understand that, for example, that person for the last 1 year was not able to code, right? Here was mostly administrative tasks, but you are looking for the developer who will start immediately, and for example in 3 days will need to do an LVC component. So in that case, it might be a gap for you, right? Or for example, vice versa, if you see that candidate have some kind of tech lead experience and you're looking for the same person, so in that case, like it's might be identified by you as a plus. So like all this kind of information which might be provided on that stage also have that layer as well. So now then we have a stage part. So we have like all different of our topics that we need to verify. So we are going through the topics, and when we going through the topics, we could use different kind of approaches how to jump from one topic to another. You could, for example, as a last question for topic one, for example, related to Apex, you could jump to the topic related to LEC component. Like, for example, you just asked something about Apex. It was a last question, and then you ask, okay, so if Apex is so powerful backend, tool. So for example, but how we could connect it with LVC components. So let's imagine that we have a situation when we need to build some specific custom UI. And when we click on the specific buttons, then what it should do, so it should invoke the Apex. Apex need to do some specific calculations and then return results to us back on the front end. So how it's possible to do with the help of the Salesforce LVC. And then, for example, you are now already in the next topic, right? And so on and so forth. So when we went through all of the topics, the next idea for us is to make sure that we will finish our interview in time. So that means that if our meeting is actually scheduled for 1 hour and finish it in time, or when, for example, it's 2 hours interview, whatever, right? So you need to be in your timeline. Also, it's expected time for candidate, to be on that call only for that specific slot. If you need to exceed for any reason that specific slot, right? So in that case, prior than interview time will come to the end, you need to ask the specific person if he is actually available for, I don't know, like 10 more minutes, and you could explain why you need them, and then you could communicate it properly. And plus, on the final stage, what is important for our expert who is actually doing the interview, it's actually to conduct some kind of summary related to entire interview process. Like for example, so we were able to review tons of topics which are really important for our open position. So thank you very much for providing feedback for all of them. So at this moment, what will be the next stage? I will review, like one more time, what kind of, let's say, answers we have, I will review it accordingly to the topic, and so on and so forth. And for example, in nearest time, our recruiter will communicate with you and will provide you results of, the technical interview. So do you have any kind of questions for me as an interviewer? And in that case, the person might have, like some additional notes about how interview went. Or for example, he could ask you, like about advices. Like for example, he could say something like, "Oh, so during our interview, I was able to see that you're asking me a lot about asynchronous Apex. Does that mean that on that project we are using it a lot? Okay, so and how you're using it? All right. So would you recommend me something how I could improve my skills?" So all these kind of questions might help you, to use something, like icebreakers in order to make sure that you communicated well with the person and you could actually let him know what he could, adjust. But in that moment, like you need to be, like not specific, right? Like for example, sorry, based on the interview, I could see that you perform at for example, bad, and there will be no any kind of, like further process. Or for example, you was fantastic, so definitely, like in 5 minutes, HR will contact you. No, so at this moment, you just need to let the person know that like you grabbed all required information, so you did that interview, right? And you will do your job as well. So if we have only 1 hour or half of hour for interview, so that means that we need to understand, like for each of the topics, how much time we have in order for us to still keep in timeline, right? And ask, like questions related to each of the topics. Because, for example, if in your position it's desirable for you to check, for example, integration, Apex, LVC, JIT, flows, Sales Cloud, and TPQ, right? So in that manner, in the case, you need to make sure that you have some time allocated for each of these topics. And if you are looking for this person who is senior level or mid level or junior, then you should calibrate your questions to that specific layer level of the person. And also, as you could see, included here a note about intro and about outro, right? In order to make sure that we also have a time for this, because at this moment we could not do anything like this. Like, for example, we're doing with the topics, and thank you, bye bye. Like it's not how it should be, right? It's in a good man. So it's in a good manner will be done in that case, and also it will give some kind of like not confident to the potential candidates that that company is actually like doing their interviews professionally. So in that manner, for us to make sure that our experts doing it like in the right manner, that they have this intro, they have this final, they have understanding how and which topics they need to cover, what kind of questions. So in that case, we need to make sure that our that the expert is actually trained to conduct interviews. So when we are talking about how different kind of persons could actually go through interview, so nowadays we could see that some of the persons actually using artificial intelligence in order to pass the interviews. And when you ask in different kind of questions, you could see how different might be answers of your candidate. Like for example, when you are asking the person what is Apex, right? So then he's absolutely sure and providing you, like short and very descriptive answer. But when you're asking him some very specific, like case, like for example, what you're gonna do in that case when, like, and you asking question like this, in that case, it's taking some time for that person to provide an answer. And you could see that, for example, sometime eyes of the person, like somewhere else, like, so that means that potentially that candidate might already use artificial intelligence. And for you, it still require, as for an expert who is actually doing the interview, understand if the person is right fit for the role or not. So in that case, just pay attention because like it's something which is already happening, right? So guys starting to use AI, they using, for example, their phones near with their computer, so phones looking for the speech, right, and then they're generating answers, and this person trying to actually like pronounce was spell it in their phone. So it's not something which is like we are looking, and we are looking for the person who will be able to do the real job and not just read from the screen. So in that case, like it's just a note for interviewers. So then we have something called interview example or interview template. So what does it mean? So if we already identified that for our, like interviews, we need to do something like this, right? So we have each topic. For each topic, we have a dedicated time, right, assigned. So in that case, we could provide something called interview template. So interview template actually contains each topic. So each topic have some specific, like time frame that we could use for the topic. Plus, here we have a list of possible questions that we could use through our interview. So, of course, during the interview, you could, like type your own questions and ask them. So it's not mandatory list, but it's at least it's list of items that you could use in order to ask them when you just started, or for example, when you're fresh to the interview process. So then, for example, when you're going through the list of the questions, you could identify which of them are actually suitable for you to check. Like, for example, how do you handle clouds in Apex, right? If, for example, you think that that specific question is, like not enough, for example, for the senior level, then you could start with something else. Or vice versa, like, for example, you would like to start with something, like which is not so critical, and you just need to take a look for the person who is middle, right? So in that case, you ask him, for example, what is RNS, what is database insert, whatever, right? So it's depending on the person and depending on the role. And when you're doing your interview, so for these topics that you are taking, so you could mark them with a specific color. Like, for example, if everything was good, then you're marking it with the green. If everything was good and, like even over, so in that case, you could add a comment, how it was. So if, for example, something went bad, so in that case, you could also add a comment here. So, for example, it's a red one, and for example, even no idea about the topic, right? So you definitely understand that that one, the topic was failed. So the same we are doing for everything. And when we have sometimes, a situation when it's not green, but at the same time not red, so you could use orange, and you could also provide a comment here, right? What was the case? So when interview just finished, and you as technical interviewer usually have, some your deals that you need to do. So in that case, you could just leave it somewhere, right, in your sheets, and then come back when time will come up, right, for you to provide a general answer about candidate. So based on the results of your interview, you need to provide, as we agreed here, right, results of interview. So it should be done in less than 8 hours. To pass these results back, to the general process for the managers to decide how move with the candidate. Should it be rejected on that stage, or should we move to the next round of our interview, right? So it depends on the results of that technical interview. So, and if you're an interviewer, so then those results, it's something that you need to provide. And if you're providing results based on your matrix, right, that you could see here, you could understand if the specific person, for example, have enough skills to fulfill that position or not. So usually there might be situation for example, some experts who is actually doing interviews, they are already working on the project, and idea for them, or the main question for them, will be like, for example, do you recommend that person for the project? Do you want that person to work in your team? And usually, like when guys who is deciding, like if they should recommend that person or not, so they deciding if they would like to have that person in their team or not, and after that they are putting their interview status like recommended or not recommended, and accordingly, like to the results that like we could see uh, in our interview template. So when everything of this done, of course, there will be like some kind of decision on the management level. But in that case, like in our video, we are only like focused on our technical interview. So what might be additional, let's say, notes related to interview? So as we already mentioned, our technical interviewer is actually a face of the company. And sometimes, based on the feedback that I was able to read in the internet, I was able to see that if the person who is actually doing interview did it in a bad manner, so in that case, candidate who tried, to pass that interview for some specific role in that company, sometimes having an assumption that that company in general perform how that technical interviewer performed. So it's not always true, and that's why like it's important for the technical interviewer to actually be a professional and do that interview professionally. So that means that like even if you could see that sometimes, for example, your candidate, like for example, mostly go in with the red colors, right? So in that case, you still need to do interview in a good manner. So you need to, like handle that situation, right? So you need to know what to do, what kind of questions to ask. You could, at the same time, if you identify that, for example, through entire topic of LVC, for example, that candidate is not doing well, so you could tell him, oh, like I could see that we have some open questions related to LVC, so it will be good for you to actually cover them. And like after the interview, I have some, for example, good materials that I was able to prepare through my career, because it actually helped me to gain experience in LVC. So I will share them with you. And now let's talk about integration. Whatever, right? So you need to be polite through the interview, and so on and so forth. So you understand what I mean when I talking about this. So also sometimes there might be situations when during the process of interview you might have a polemic. So let's imagine that you asked some question and candidate provided feedback, and then for example he's asking you, is it correct answer or not? And for example you're giving him feedback that, for example, no, it's not what I expected, right? And candidate might ask you, like why, maybe could you please give me like your understanding of what should be the answer to your question. And if you're providing something different, right, there might be a polemic, right? Like, for example, hey, like it's not how you asked, right, previously. So, for example, now of course I will answer you the same, and so on and so forth, right? So, better first of all, it's to like try to avoid any kind of polemic, or for example, when you're doing so, right, it's to show your level of expertise and prove it with like documentation. So, for example, if you open the documentation and it's mentioned here that, for example, daily limits equal to Z, and for example your candidate provided you feedback that it's something different, then you at least you have a proof. But in general, it's better to avoid that kind of like polemic and just try to make it a comfortable discussion through the call between you and between the candidate. So next topic it's about the questions, right? So we could conduct our interview in two kind of manner. First of them, it's just strict questions, like for example, how we could call REST API from Salesforce, how we could prepare a custom REST API on Salesforce. So you see, those questions are actually strict and they are specific. So they require for the person to just know, or to have a theoretic knowledge, right? And sometimes even from that place, you will not be able to identify the person actually have no hands-on experience. But if you will ask that person, with some kind of different manner, so for example, related to integration. So let's imagine that we have some kind of external site. So that site, for example, have some specific form, and when customers click on that form, then the data from that form should come to Salesforce. So how you could organize that implementation, and then person trying to explain to you what might be solution in that case. You're listening for it, asking additional questions, like through the way, like for example, okay, I see your point. Will you need to use a connected app for this? And then, for example, a person will give you some kind of answer. Sorry, I don't know what is a connected app. Okay. So in that case, if you have in the list of your, for example, question connected app, you could already mark it at, with red, whatever, right? Even it was, a question in between, but at the same time, you already got information about the specific topic, right? So in that case, you could already mark it. And it sounds like a discussion just around some specific topic, right? And at the same time, you're asking, already questions which are related to this. Even sometimes when we're doing an interview, we could make an interview in general look like as one, like big project that we have to implement. So at the very beginning, you are telling your person, let's say, hey, let's do our interview in a very interesting manner. So let's try through our interview, for example, build some application. And for example, that application handling millions of records. So in that case, for example, we need to provide an LVC components which will be able to render, like those records on the page. What might be your approach? So then person, for example, letting you know that he will use data table. Then you're asking him, okay, if data table, but how the data table will be able to handle so big amount of records? And then, for example, person will let you know we will use a pagination, we will use search, like so on and so forth, right? So that means that you could start from there, and even you could conduct your interview in such kind of manner. So there are, tons of different kind of approaches. But at this moment, by the end, you need to understand what was the outcome, right? So you need to be able to map it into the specific understanding how good that person in integrations, how good that person in, for example, in CPQ, how good that person in Apex, and so on and so forth. Right. So I think that at this moment, that's it about technical interview topic. And thank you very much, guys, for your attention.